Well, I'm hoping that it's 11:55 right now. Anyhow, just would like to take this chance before I get into the talk to thank the sponsors of Product Camp Austin and making it possible to continue working and meeting as a group. I learned a lot about product management from Product Camp here in Austin, and I'm sort of excited that this is the first time I'm able to actually do a presentation. And so, again, thank you very much to our sponsors. And with that, I will start to talk about software bill of materials, or SBOMs. And why do you want to make sure you've got one in your next product? A little bit of background about me is I'm a director of strategic programs at the Linux Foundation. And before that, I was a director of product management at Lenaro. And before that, I was managing, doing software bill of materials, basically doing SDKs at Freescale/NXP/Motorola, depending on how far back you want to go. So I've been in Austin now for well over 20 years and have been in software development for over 30. So there's a lot of things problems I've been, tackling with over these times. And what I want to sort of talk about a little bit is something that for the last 10 years has been a focus point, but in recent years has been becoming more and more urgent. So when I say software bill of materials, well, what does it mean? Well, I think everyone's familiar with what we have, an ingredient list on all the food products we buy. This ingredient list lets us know what's there, and if we have issues or things we're trying to avoid, lets us avoid them. This is that list that was there is the list for Twinkies. And you think, okay, I want to have a Twinkie. Must be vegetarian. Okay, I can just go ahead and have it. Well, actually, when you actually start looking, you find that in the ingredients there's beef fat. So suddenly means that Twinkies are not acceptable for vegetarians. But unless you actually have that detailed level of ingredients, your first assumption would be that it would be safe if you're a vegetarian. So we also are quite familiar with when we get new devices, there's instruction manuals on how to collect, how to install them. There's all the contents listed. That's a bill of materials, a hardware bill of materials. However, someone's muted, needs to be muted. So what we need to do is, excuse me, I think I got.
Sorry about that. I'm looking for it.
Thanks. Okay, I'll keep going then.
Hold on, Kate. Let me unmute you. I had to mute everyone to make sure that you could be unmuted too.
Hearing it.
There you go.
Thank you. Anyhow, there are three perspectives across the supply chain that we all have to consider. Are you producing software? Are you choosing software from someone else to combine and integrate and then produce another software? Or are you looking at it from the perspective of I've got some software coming in, I'm going to operate it? Those three perspectives have to be considered when working with software and the life cycles of software. Now, the challenge right now these days is how many organizations can actually answer, am I affected by this vulnerability, be it shell shock, heartbleed, meltdown, Ripple 20, etc. These vulnerabilities are happening across the industry. And in order for us to understand what's there, we really need to know what's in the software and what we're running on the systems. And because there's now money involved, significant money involved, the urgency level has been going up because you can't go a couple of weeks without hearing another vulnerability that's making headline news. And in some cases, some of these vulnerabilities and so forth are actually impacting and potentially causing people's lives to be lost. So there's definite concern to try to make sure we start to figure out how to do this better. Right now, from Black Duck did a survey this year, and they're source code auditing. They do SCA work, and they have various customers that do it, and then they provide a summary of the information they find. And they found that 99% of the code bases they audited did contain open source components already. And of those open source components, they made up 70% of that audited code base. So people are basically past time to market by building on open source starting points and adding value add. Good recipe for time to market, new features, new functionality, gets gets customers excited. Good products, quick products. The other thing that's been observed from the Sonatype folks is the open source components are double and triple digit growth going on. There's more and more and more of these components available, and there's no slowdown in sight. It's been happening for the last decade, and I've seen it. That sort of compounds what I've sort of seen anecdotally too. So the sad reality right now is most companies are not able to accurately summarize the software running on their systems. What dependency does all the dependencies down hidden in there? Does your Windows system have all the vulnerabilities there? Could someone come in the back door, so forth? A lot of the modern digital infrastructure is very sophisticated, but there are, as XKCD pointed out in this last couple months, there may be projects hidden in there that are very vulnerable, and that people have been maintaining as a good service, but those pieces are all important for making sure that we have the supply chain secured. So getting transparency there is pretty important. In the last 2 years, the NTIA has started a multi-stakeholder agreement to basically try to come up with a common definition across the industry of what a software bill of materials is. A lot of people have different perspectives on it, and as we pull it together, we need to figure out what is. If you're coming in it from a legal perspective, you think it's licensing and all the licensing information. If you're coming in from a security analyst perspective, obviously you need to know all your dependencies, your components, and so forth. And so by bringing all these different stakeholders together, the NTIA has been trying to come up with common definitions and get them used across the industry. And from their fact right now, software bill of materials is a formal record containing details and supply chain relationships between the components used in building software. And that can be libraries and modules, open source, proprietary, free, paid. The data in it can be widely available or access restricted. They're not being prescriptive about it, and they're trying to make sure that we start to get the concepts and the language so we can start to get tooling and we can start to automate this whole infrastructure. That's the goal. And at the heart of it, a software bill of materials is something like, okay, you've got your basic application, what's included in it. You've got Bingo Buffer and Bob's Browser. Okay, that's your part of your application. But you may not know all the pieces that are in Bob's Browser. Well, you might know some of the information, or you might know nothing at all. And Carol's compression, that that's included in there, and that there's nothing else from that. So you can provide the information level that you do know, but you can also be explicit about what you don't know. And that's one of the things that the NTIA group has been sorting. And there's a full document on the software composition. There's a framing document that was published last year that goes into this in a lot more detail. So who should be using an SBOM? Well, any organization, pretty much, be it open source, be it a company, nonprofit, for-profit, etc. Anyone who's producing software or consuming software should be aware of SBOMs and either asking for them or generating them if they're putting out products, because this is what you're going to be needing for maintenance. Is you're going to be needing to understand what's happening, and if you want to be supporting your customers, you need to know, do you need to let them know that there's a vulnerability in one of the components that you've depended on for your product and be able to push the information to them, or have them be able to know and ask you for it. So SBOMs are pretty much required when you're doing with contractual terms. There's legal aspects of it. In fact, we're starting to see a precedent where people are asking for SBOMs in part of contract negotiations. And if they don't have an SBOM at the fingertips available to get them to them, they're saying, okay, well, that's a good negotiation point to pin down the price. And so the functionality and features are definitely obviously part of why people are buying products. But it's a factor that if you can't support that product in the field and you don't have the transparency to know what's in there, that's being used as a negotiation point. And obviously, once the product is in field and in play, being able to do maintenance and remediate vulnerabilities and assess risk, these are key points. So when should an SBOM be used? Well, pretty much any point in the supply chain cycle. Most people focus on creating it and releasing it, installing it, but there's a maintenance cycle where the people need to know and understand where the vulnerabilities are, and that's what's hitting the industry right now a lot. And so being able to look at, generating and adding information onto your software bill of materials could be done inside a company. I've run these tests on the software, I've proven this evidence, or it could be done, between companies. Or I've got, this is what I'm putting up as a service. Here are all the contents. This is the latest image that's up and active. all of these things are places where software bill of materials is needed. So why should you start caring about this now? We've been going along just fine for 20 years with the internet. Well, actually, the cost right now of remediating these vulnerabilities is getting pretty staggering. And we're starting to see a lot of awareness in North America, Europe, and Asia, for that matter, all about the cybersecurity supply chain management and how do we start getting that going. We're seeing reuse happening more and more. The components is reusing components is your way to fast time to market. However, what's in those components is sometimes a bit of a black box, and we need to get that transparency there. A big example of this is containers. How often do you want to just quickly grab a container and start executing and doing what you want your task? All the time, myself included. However, what's actually in those containers and all the details there are hard to, it's hard to sort of pull it apart and understand it because they don't make it easy. The idea is you've got the container, just go. But what all the software, what are all the software components that are in there that make that possible? What's making that image that you're using? And to a large extent, software, it was used to be, you download one software piece of software, you run it, and that would be it on an embedded device. Well, the world has changed. Like I say, we have very modular systems. They are all integrated. There's thousands of components that are running your software, either for building it or for executing it. And we need that transparency now as a prerequisite to do the analysis properly and to do the remediation. And the regulatory authorities have woken up to this in the last couple of years. And the FDA has provided some guidance that they will be asking for software bill of materials for medical devices in the years to come. They have not said when, but they have been explicit in some of the meetings. We've also seen FERC come and weigh in on this, and they've got some guidance for the cybersecurity that is assuming there's a software bill of materials there. So here in the US, the NTIA has been coordinating to create an industry-friendly solution, and I'm participating in one of their work groups. In fact, I co-lead the formats and tooling work group. So I've been sort of seeing a lot of this coming in firsthand. But what we want to try to do is they don't want to have, rammed down everyone's throat what it has to be. They want to try and make sure that they bubble up and use what's there today, which is part of the reason I'm enjoying working with them. And this is an example of the NERC SIP 13 that came out earlier in the year, and they sort of postponed implementation till October 1st. And everyone was expecting them to postpone implementation, and they said, no, start implementing. So this is one of the supply chain risk management. And it doesn't say SBOM per se in there, but it has a basic assumption that you have one in order to do the risk management processes that are being called for in this device. And I think we'll be seeing a lot more of these types of guidance coming in from our regulators. So who should use an SBOM? Well, pretty much any organization that's concerned about better supporting their software products internally and their customers. And so we need to go after this. The NTIA group has basically created a FAQ that talks about SBOMs, and you can go and look at it from the links on the site, or just, SBOM FAQ NTIA, I'll probably find, direct you to it. But all of these informations are there, and we should be probably looking at it. And, they've been starting to talk about this pretty extensively from, these are various slides of the use cases about producing software, operating software, choosing software. Why do you care about having an SBOM? This is from some of their material. And then the GSA is now starting to, recognize this as well. And they're talking about, who uses an SBOM and for what? Well, produce, can choose or purchase or operate software. All these cases you want to have an SBOM in play. And in terms of the open source side of it too, the awareness has grown. And one of the projects at the Linux Foundation, OpenChain, has just finished taking their specification, and it should be becoming an ISO standard in the next, well, it's gone through the voting and approved, and also we're waiting for the ISO number to be published. But a key component of that is, for your open source content, you need to have a bill of materials, which is effectively a software bill of materials for any open source that you're using. And there's a huge range of companies that have bought into this already and are supporting it internally and have been validated. And if you go to their website for OpenChain, you can see all this. Then we have the question of how are we going to be sharing this SBOMs between companies or within. And be it internal databases, externally sized at manufacturers' websites, all these methods are possible. Some of it's going to be public, some of it's going to be private. Can't say right now which way it's going to go. It's all going to be individual. No one's being prescriptive, but we do need to have awareness that we do need to start to be able to share this metadata about software between partners and supply chains. And the industry itself is, the hospital industry. There's a hospital proof of concept for medical devices going on as part of NTIA, where medical device suppliers and medical device consumers are the suppliers are creating the SBOMs, and the consumers like New York Presbyterian, Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, and so forth are actually taking these sample device SBOMs, and they are making sure that they can consume it and bring it into their systems. So we're prototyping this work as it's going. We're seeing interest in this in the banking sectors, energy sectors, and so forth. So the industry is waking up as a whole to this problem and are trying to figure out how to make this work effectively for themselves. So benefits from adopting the SBOMs are, be able to deal with the vulnerabilities and risk. Also licensing and making sure you're clean on your licensing and there's no surprises coming to hit you and you know the terms of use. Clearly, there's compliance requirements, there's quantification of risks. And then when the vulnerabilities happen, are you affected or not? Do you need to mitigate? Or, you can prove to yourself that no, it doesn't matter to you for your use cases and operation. And then obviously operation costs get lower too, because you've got improved efficiencies. So pretty much across the sectors, it's a good practice to have an SBOM, and figuring out ways to make it happen efficiently as part of your process is now the challenge. And we also see that, various product security directors, are estimating you're saving hundreds of thousands of man hours right now if you have one, because a lot of this work right now is being done manually. And that just isn't scaling, not with all the components out there. And so then when you're doing these things manually, it costs a lot of money and it's slow to respond. So what's possible? How do we do this? How do we have an SBOM? Well, NTIA has recognized 3 formats: Software Package Data Exchange, SPDX, which is one that's playing at the Linux Foundation, SWID, which has been coming from NIST and is an ISO standard, and then CycloneDX is a newcomer that has emerged, organically through the ecosystem, and basically being done to summarize vulnerability information. It's come through the OWASP group, if you're tracking that. And these elements here are pretty much what a minimum viable SBOM has to consist of. It has to have some relationship component. It has to have, potentially a hash to know if it's changed or not underneath you, some version information. Does it have an identifier that's unique? Do you have a component name that's unique? And who supplied it? And then who created the SBOM? These are what they define as minimum viable. And those are all pretty much, achievable with today's technologies. And so, these 3 formats all have, tools available in their ecosystems that can generate the information. The SPDX can do it to spreadsheets or, these tag value documents like this, or RDF, JSON, YAML, and XML. SWIG comes to XML, and then CycloneDX is to JSON and XML. So the technologies are there. We just need to start using them and making them efficient to use them. There's a lot of different types of tools that need to work with them. We need to look at things that produce them, like do you want to produce your SBOM every build? Do you want to do it? Do you need to do it manually? Do you need to do it after you've gotten a product? Do you want to audit the product? All these are cases. And then when you're trying to consume it, you're downloading this open source package to use in your product. Okay, well, let's look and see what the SBOM is. You want to view it, see if there's any surprises sitting there. I compare 2 SBOMs, one version to another. You may want to analyze it and import it into your systems. And then you may want to do some transformation types of tools, from one file format to another file format to better work with your systems, or merge some SBOMs together, or support with them with other libraries and so forth. So these are all sort of the tools that have been identified as necessary to work with this. And we're obviously interested if you come up with a case we don't have in terms of this taxonomy to increase it. And for each tool, we're trying to collect this type of information. We have a basic template, and then we are putting information about what types of capabilities are there, and then the functionality that's associated with it, and where you can find it, how to use it, and what formats it supports. And there are documents that are being hosted through NTIA for each of these ecosystems that list the tools that are out there. And you can find some of them are open source and some of them are proprietary products that support these formats. So with having these options out there, we suddenly start to be able to build this ecosystem up to make this automation happen. How we're looking at it from the Linux Foundation's perspective is we're looking to make sure we have common processes and norms, and we're working with OpenChain for that. The common data formats for the exchanging the SBOM information, we're working with the SPDX format. And we have commonly available and simple to use tooling. And there's a group of open source projects that are under the ACT umbrella that are trying to make sure they find the gaps between each and then minimize them. So OpenChain's specification, as you can see, basically talks about what has to come inbound, and then makes available processes for training people on how to work with these SBOMs, as well as the policies and processes, and then what you should be expected on your outbound to your downstream. The specification itself, if you want to take a look, is pretty short. It's about 14 pages. And as we say, the ISO ballot's been finished. It's DIS 5230, and we're expecting to actually have an ISO publication number in the next month. And it's been translated into Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, Polish, and German already. And this is all being done by volunteers in the community. Software package data exchange. This is basically the metadata that you'd be putting into an SBOM. There's the information about the SBOM itself, basic package information, file information, snippet if you've got it, and mostly you just need to do package and then the relationships, and that's what the SBOMs are calling for. But we have a richer split of ecosystem use cases that can be satisfied with this format as well. The format itself has been in development for 10 years. And it's been submitted into ISO to become an international standard. It's a de facto standard at this point in time with a lot of the open source ecosystem places. And in fact, over in Japan last year, one of the things in the latest version of the SPDX spec is something called SPDX Lite. And they were finding most of this was coming in from the Japanese auto manufacturers, the tier 1, tier 2. And they were finding that some of the tier 2 did not have the infrastructure in place to provide SPDX documents. So they came up with an SPDX Lite where these certain subset of fields is filled in manually in spreadsheets, and then they can take and transport them into their system so that they do have some line of sight down to where the components have come from and the basic information about them. So you can phase it in over time. You don't have to sort of go whole hog, but we do need to start getting that transparency through this large supply chain we're all working with. Part of the reason SPDX is effective in this space is the fact there's an underlying model behind it. And so that lets us work with spreadsheets. And from a spreadsheet, we can go to a tag value, which is the image I sort of showed. But we can also YAML, JSON, and XML, as well as RDF. So the underlying data is coherent. It can be easily imported to databases and then between file formats, depending on your tooling. Right now, the SPDX project is an open source project. Anyone can join. But we're trying to align with what NTA is recommending, and we're sort of going after that base that they were talking about, but then we're also looking at having profiles for different use cases. Things like the licensing side of it is what we've been a very strong historical background in SPDX on, but we're adding in more information about vulnerabilities, how it's used, the usage in the field, then how it's linked together if you're having multiple SBOMs and so forth. And then the chain of custody, as well as build information on how the software is built. All these use cases are needed. And so,
I just want to let you know you have about 5 minutes left.
That's fine. I'm heading in there. Good, thank you. So our SPDX base and our licensing profile will be pretty much equivalent to what's happening with the SPDX 2.2 specification. And that's what we have up there today, and pretty much can satisfy what's being asked for. But there'll be more cases coming in, and we'll see more change happening. So because we want to use SBOM all stages, we want to make sure the tooling can support coming in from the upstreams, like third party or proprietary. And then within the organizations at any of these points here, you want to be able to generate an SBOM, your policy checks before release, your release You want to have an SBOM potentially to pass on to your downstream or your consumers. And you may be producing it for products or for services. And in terms of the SPDX, the tools that are associated with it, we've been sort of grouping them into authoring during build, and these open source tools are able to author during your build and generate SPDX documents. These ones are able to author after creation. Turn is one of the projects that's actually able to take a container and pull it apart and generate an SPDX document to summarize the metadata. So you can actually see what's in there if you don't have one produced for you. You can actually go and recreate it after the fact. And then we also have Physiology, which is able to produce it and or quite frankly consume it from others, and then be able to diff and see are there any changes. And then as part of the SPDX project, we have tools to consume and transform this type of information to help other tools be created to use it. So we're trying to sort of build up this ecosystem bit by bit so that we can all be efficient and automate the SPDX, automate the software bill of materials with SPDX. So I guess in conclusion, I'm going to say that, the software supply chain transparency, it's coming. I don't think we can avoid it at this point in time. People have been trying to for a long time, but I think it's overdue. And there really is just too much risk and exposure from open source and software of unknown provenance that's in our supply chain today. We're seeing our enterprise customers demanding it, and we're seeing standards emerge to expect it and to expect best practices around it. And the regulators are seeing the needs for it. And so pretty much now's the time to start planning for it, because hopefully it will be there. And with that, I just want to say thank you very much. And if you've got any questions about the mentioned projects or about SBOMs in general, please feel to reach out. And with that, I will stop sharing. If there's any questions, if there's a minute or two.
Hey guys, feel free to type the chat questions in the chat here in Zoom, or if you want to type them into the Slack channel, both work, or you can unmute yourself as another option. I'll also be posting the link for feedback with Kate in the channel right now. So go ahead and as you're asking questions, feel free to fill that in.
Okay, so go over to the Slack channel. Okay, I've got what role generally manages an SBOMs inside companies? Right now, we are seeing procurement being active in managing SBOMs initially as part of the purchase discussion. And then I think product managers are probably going to be the ones who'll be needing to manage it, making sure that there's ones available as part of the release procedures and having that available. Certainly the security CISOs and so forth under there are looking at it from an operational perspective of what software you're running. They're wanting to know what's in the SBOM. Donald writes in, is there a conflict materials aspect to the SBOM endeavor? Yes, part of the reason to do the SBOM is to actually understand if there are conflicts. They could be licensing conflicts, they could be version conflicts. You may have a dependency on something that have the wrong version installed, so you may be setting yourself up for vulnerabilities. All this information is there. I think I'm understanding what you mean by conflict materials, but if I'm not, please please clarify. Feel free to unmute too and talk if you'd like. So how does SPDX help track software publishers, disclosures, or identify zero-day vulnerabilities that introduce business risk to their customers? Right now, we provide a link to the CPE, or Common Platform Enumeration, so you can automatically link in the MVD database and see if there's information that's out there today. One of the directions we're working with for SPDX3 is we are looking to be able to basically include in your SBOM what was known at a point in time. And we need to do this sometimes for audit use cases. And so these sorts of informations are there. Donald's question just came back and said, examples is blood diamonds, more political in nature than technical issues. Well, actually blood diamonds are being tracked right now through blockchains. And so there's actually Hyperledger projects at the LF and others that are actually tracking physical assets through the supply chain. And one of the projects that's coming forward is one called Digital Bill of Materials, or DBOM. And what we're looking at is being able to put these bill of materials into a Hyperledger so that you can share, you can adjust your sharing and set up channels of information that are signed and authenticated over time too. But for actually for bill of materials or actually physical devices, there's different mechanisms out there than the software bill of materials. And I think with that, any other questions? Oops. Okay. Well, then I will say thank you very much, everyone.